Little did I know. For some people, for some families, friends, whatever the group might be, grief and death are really uncomfortable and not spoken about much. And in society in general, I feel it's still a little bit of we're not sure how to deal with this kind of scenario. There's nothing wrong with that in a sense. Everyone has their coping mechanisms and everyone's different. And as long as you're not hurting anyone around you or yourself, that's okay. But in some senses, it is something we need to change, I think. I'm not the one that has all the answers, and I'm not the one that's the gospel on grief and somebody that is telling you it has to be like this. But I just think if we talked about it more, things may change. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that was part of a wide community. My father started a disabilities group in the late 70s, which was pivotal for me going forward, but meant that I met and knew through our family, through the community, through this group, people with varying physical differences, intellectual differences, and life limiting conditions. Therefore, grief, death, the understanding of that was something that was very clear to me and my younger brother from an early age. We knew that people weren't going to be around forever. We knew that people were sometimes given less time than others. It was made clear to us, but it was made clear to us in a way that we understood. Yet, at the age of 12, I still couldn't get my head around it. And this is where it all began. This is where my journey, my bumpy road, shall we say, of grief, of death, of losing loved ones started. And it started with the biggest punch in the stomach I've ever experienced. Well, I thought I'd ever experienced. I knew from a young age, as I've said, that people were often given limited time. So it was made clear to me that a very special person in my life, in my family's life, that was incredibly close to all of us, was on limited time. This person was called Barbara. Barbara was a energetic, charismatic, unique, larger than life, as cliche as that phrase is, but so true, character. She was somebody who my mum had been friends with and very close friends with for a long time. And she had a condition called cystic fibrosis, which meant that she had limited time. Again, something I was very much aware of. Though at 12, you still don't fully grasp it. And at 12 years old, I remember still thinking, nah, not with Barbara. That's not going to happen. Something will come along. And her life won't be limited. it's fair to say that I held Barbara up on this quite big pedestal, and I became very close to her very quickly from a young age. She had this beautiful curly hair when I was younger. This is what I remember anyway from the Barbara I knew. And she always had fake tan. She was always very glam. And she would be open about her condition. There was a time when she was in my parents' living room, and she had a drip to help. I don't know whether it was with the pain, whether it was with just to give her a bit longer. I'm not sure. But I remember asking her about this and going, how do you know when it's done? And she, as calm as anything, with a smile, said, when it's painful, then I know the medicine's finished, or something along those lines. And from that moment on, I was kind of in awe of this incredible, beautiful woman that was in my life that I loved. You know, and I was very fortunate in that way because I had many women who looked after me and loved me that I grew up with, and Barbara was one of those. Even as I write this at the age of 31, it's still quite painful. And this is the first, I don't want to say lesson, let's call it reflection. This is the first reflection about grief. No matter how many years have passed, no matter how much therapy, which I'll get to later on in the book, how much talking, how much watching videos, how much writing about it, whatever it might be, whatever you do to help you just manage, that grief never goes away. And even now, all these years later, it's still here with me as I write this first chapter in this book. So, back to Barbara. So I was 12, and by this point, I was really close to Barbara. My child brain that was still developing kind of formed this defense mechanism that I've had since that I'm learning to kind of undo. And that was this defense mechanism of, it's not happening. She's not going to die. She'll be fine. There'll be something that will come along. And this defense mechanism carried on even on that night. I was in my room, medium-sized room, in my bunk bed, and I'd gone to see her not long before this, maybe a few weeks, to see her in hospital. And I think I knew, or I was told, I can't quite remember, that would be the last time. And I was sitting in this bunk bed, and my mum had gone out. And I think to see her, or I'm not quite sure now, it was so long ago. And I remember feeling this sense of panic and thinking, what am I going to do? And I remember feeling this panic as well because the reality of what was happening was coming to the front of my mind, but my defense mechanism was working extra hard to push it back. And I lay there and I felt incredibly scared and incredibly, looking back at it now, I know what that feeling was, anxious. And I just remember curling up thinking, still, no, be all right. They would have found a drug now, be fine. I remember my mum coming into my bedroom and saying words that I would soon find I would have to get used to, and all of my family would have to get used to for a very long time. She's died, Matthew. At that point, the defense mechanism started to break. My world came crashing down tremendously. And I just couldn't understand it. And I'd been told, but I still couldn't understand it. It was a feeling that was overwhelmingly painful and confusing and scary. This person that I loved, that I adored, was gone. They're never coming back. And as child's brains do, and anyone's brain does when you lose somebody, they go into questioning, they go into what ifs. My brain went into, what if I didn't love her enough? What if I didn't say it enough? What if, for some strange reason that I now know, years later, through a lot of therapy work, was just my child self trying to cope with this, I didn't love her hard enough, so therefore, that's why she died. Now I know, like I said, that wasn't the case. That was, again, my child brain just trying to make sense of everything. In the months that followed, I tried to carry on making sense. I tried to carry on making sense of the funeral. And that first experience of death when you're that young, that wrapping your head around that, you know, and in a lovely way, the church was full of lots of people, but not understanding who some of these people are, not understanding why you're not able to talk to her still not grasping it. Having that first experience of awake, not understanding. You're there and you're sitting on these steps outside this venue, and inside people are smiling and they're having a drink and they're looking at photos and they're laughing to each other, and you're sitting there as this 12-year-old, this scared, lonely, angry 12-year-old who thought, how can they be doing this when Barbara's now dead? How can they be sitting there and laughing and smiling when somebody's just died? Again, years later, through therapy, getting older, maturing more, understanding the world more, talking to those around you who love you and care for you, you start to understand, okay, I get now why. Because people are celebrating their life, they're looking back, they're talking about them. But I still find wakes really tricky, really difficult still. Still those feelings come up. And in the months that followed, grief felt like it was everywhere. I was supported through family and friends to try and understand, to try and process, to try and manage this grief. But it was such a strong sense of grief that actually it stayed with me for 10 years in its real, raw form. 10 years. It took me 10 years when I finally had a moment of therapy of realizing it was not my fault that I didn't say I loved her enough. That she was always going to die. There was nothing that could stop that, because at that point in time, the drugs weren't there. The treatment wasn't as it is now. And it was a life limiting condition. It took me 10 years. And there's another reflection here, I think, about grief, and that we can take the time and a moment to look at, is that it's not linear. It's not that, okay, in a year, you're going to feel a bit better. You're going to be okay. You're going to be able to manage that grief. It's different for everybody and for every individual. And whatever your grief might be at the moment, whatever it looks like, it's being kind to yourself and realizing that grief that I'm feeling it in the way I'm feeling it. And that's okay. As long as I'm not harming anybody around me or myself, I can feel this grief in this way. And it's not necessarily going to be that it's going to be a linear thing of, in 6 months you start to understand, and then in a year you start to go on to the next stage of the journey. It varies, and it varies from individual to individual. Now, as I said at the start of this chapter, I didn't know what was to come, and our family didn't know what was to come. But there was more to come. There was more moments that were going to make me question grief all over again, that were going to make me go through all those emotions again and some new ones.